Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be looking at a Bach chorale, a couple of phrases, and working out why it works so well. So if you've come on here for cookery tips, I'm afraid you're in the wrong place, because we're going to be talking about icing a musical cake. So if you ice a cake, you've got to have the cake made in the first place. You can't actually ice a cake that doesn't exist. So we're going to be looking at what is the musical cake. And then we're going to be looking at how Bach ices it. In other words, how he takes some fairly basic harmony and embellishes it to turn it into the finished product or a really tasty piece of chorale writing. Now, as we know, Bach had these chorale melodies, these hymn tune melodies that he inherited, and he set about the job of reharmonizing them, of embellishing them to make them much more interesting. So first of all, let's start off by hearing the melody of this particular Bach chorale. It's 299 in the Riemann Schneider collection. This is the chorale melody. And arguably in the original, these little fiddly extra notes might well have not been there. So it might have been even as simple as this. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not the most exciting melody in the world, is it really? I mean, what is this melody? We're in E flat major. It starts on B flat, it repeats B flat, it goes up a note, and it repeats it. It goes up a note, and it repeats it. It goes up a note and stops. Well, there you are, folks. That's the first phrase. Not the most exciting theme I've heard. Maybe the second phrase is going to do something more interesting. What does it do? It goes up a note and repeats it. It comes down a note and repeats it. Comes down a note, and then this time it doesn't repeat it for some reason, but now it does repeat it, and then it comes back to the B flat, which is where we started 4 measures ago. So it's a very uninteresting chorale melody, isn't it? So poor old Bach gets hold of this thing and wonders what on earth we're going to make of it. So this is what Bach does when he ices the cake. He harmonizes this and puts all sorts of exciting embellishment into it. So I'm going to start now by playing the final version when Bach has finished icing his musical cake. And it goes like this. Isn't that amazing? Because you start off listening to all those repeated notes thinking I might be asleep by the end of the next phrase, and then you hear what Bach does with it and you think, oh, this is a rather exciting chorale. Actually, it's not an exciting chorale. From a musical perspective, the line is pretty tedious, but hear what he's done to it to make it sound interesting. So, for the purposes of this exercise, what I have done to Bach's final bit of cake icing is that I've de-iced the cake and I've just presented the harmony that Bach has written without any extra embellishment. So let's just sort of have a look and have a listen to that. What does it sound like with Bach's harmony without all of that icing, all that embellishment? This is the top pair of lines of the page. We made it. Pretty tedious, isn't it? Even with the chords. So Bach has found some harmony to go in there. Nothing wrong with the harmony at all, but it's not really bringing this chorale to life, is it? Let's have a quick look through the harmony, so at least we've got that perspective on it. We're in E flat major. This is chord 1, followed by chord 1 again. He's just done a simple repetition of the same chord. Then he's gone to chord 4. Then he has, instead of just repeating 4, he's thought, let's go to chord 2. So we've got a different chord there, so that's quite a good move. And then he goes for 5, 7. And then he has 5, 7 again, the bass leaping an octave, so we can have a cadence on chord 1. So a 5-1 cadence or a 5-7-1 cadence, that's totally normal. And to have a bass that hops dominant, dominant, tonic, hot, cross, buns. See what he's doing there. So there's nothing fancy about the harmony, is there? But what's good is he's repeating the chord there, but not repeating the chord here, because that would be a bit too predictable. So he repeats the chord there and then says, okay, we could have 2 chords there. Remember, when you're repeating a note, your big chance is either to change the inversion of the previous chord or to say which other 2 chords in the key have this note in them. Because if you're thinking, well, I'm going to harmonize this C, well, C is the top of chord 2, it's the middle of chord 4, it's the bottom of chord 6. So 2, 4, 6 all work. So what has he done? He's gone from chord 4 to chord 2. So a bit of variety there. And then he's just got 2 of these 5, 7 chords before he comes back to 1. Nothing over complicated about that. The next phrase is going to modulate to B flat major, the dominant key. So at some point he's got to find a pivot chord. You may think this is the pivot chord because this B flat major chord is chord 5 in E flat and it's chord 1 in B flat major. So maybe that's the pivot. Or you might think that this chord is the pivot because, you know, actually that's a chord in both keys. It's chord 2 in the new key of B flat major and it's chord 6 in the old key of E flat major. Sometimes when you're looking for a pivot chord, there's more than one option really. But anyway, the pivot corner is somewhere there. We know that we're in the new key by the time we get here because he's got an A natural. So we've had the B flat major chord, we've explained that, and the C minor chord, we've explained that. Then this chord, this is the dominant 7th of the new key, B flat major. Then he goes on to chord 6 at this point. He could have gone to chord 1, but he's going to come to chord 1 at the end of the phrase. So I suspect that's why he's used a chord 6 there, just so we don't anticipate the 1 that's going to come at the end of the phrase. Then a bit of a classic Bach trick, 2, 7 in first inversion, followed by 5, followed by 1. So, all fairly kind of standard stuff. But there's the on-ice cake, and we're kind of completely convinced by the harmony, even though there's nothing kind of radical about it. But we're still not convinced that the chorale has been turned into anything interesting. Let's now compare. If we compare the uniced first bar or first measure with the iced version, what's the difference? Here's the uniced first bar. Here's the icing. Oh, suddenly the bass line has come to life. So what's Bach done in the bass line? Well, he started with the chord 1 that we had in the uniced version. Here's an unaccented passing note. Okay, so then we go on to first inversion of the same chord, the tonic chord, before the bass jumps back to the root position. Then he goes on to the chord 4 of the uniced version, but then he has a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbour tone in the bass, which makes it a bit more interesting. And then he does this in the bass again, where he goes to the chord 2 of the uniced version, but this time he's in first inversion, going to root position. So you can hear just by waking the bass line up, simply by using passing notes or passing tones, or by using those auxiliary notes or neighbor tones, the bass line brings the original thing to life. The original, the icing, aha, suddenly very interesting. Now, in the second bar, the second measure, we said it goes 5, 7, 5, 7, 1, and it went or. So what's Bach done to that to ice it? Well, he's done this. So arguably a bit more movement in the rhythm helps to give it a little more energy, a bit more sparkle. But what's he done? Well, here he's used a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone. He's also done the same thing in the tenor part. So both the alto and the tenor part using those auxiliary notes or neighbor tones. So double lower auxiliary notes is just making that corner a bit richer. And then a very small amendment when the tenor part jumps down. So instead of just sitting on this F, it goes F, D, and then B flat. This D kind of creates a temporary dissonance with this soprano E flat, which is rather nice. But the soprano E flat is only there for a 16th note, a semiquaver, before it moves on to an F, which of course is consonant with a chord. So it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Okay, well, moving on. The third measure of the uniced version. Listen to what he does with that. So quite a few things going on when we look at this. What's happening here? We've got double passing notes going up, double passing tones in the tenor and the bass part. Then he's got this B flat major chord and he's put it in first inversion. And then on the next eighth note, the next quaver, it resorts to root position. And we also have a passing note, a passing tone in the alto part, which turns the 5 into 5/7. So instead of just having two B flat major chords being repeated, we've now got this, which makes it much more interesting. Then what does he do on the next beat? Well, in the original, the uniced version, we've just got this C minor chord. Well, here we've got the C minor chord. There's a passing note in the bass, which he manages to carry on. So these kind of scale movements in the bass line, he's very keen on those. Apart from this passing note, this passing tone in the bass, he also manages to tuck in a suspension in the tenor part. Prepared here, sounded there, resolved there. And you see what's going on there? We've got this D that belongs to the end of the 5/7 chord, then a C minor chord with this ninth suspended in the tenor, then resolved as the bass has this passing note. So this makes it an interesting dissonance, and then that makes it even more dissonant. And then, of course, instead of just having a plain 5/7 chord, we've got a C minor chord in first inversion going on to the 5/7 in the new key. So that bar becomes really very interestingly embellished. So you notice there's a bit more happening in the second phrase than there was in the first phrase. So let's compare the uniced with the iced version. Here's the uniced. Here's the icing. Much more interesting. Okay, and now let's see what's happening between here and the end. So in the original, or what's Bach done? Rather more interesting, isn't it? So here's the G minor chord of the uniced version. Then he's got double passing notes, alto and bass. Hear them going in tenths. So that's rather nice. It's a nice texture as well, isn't it, to have those tenths. Then it goes on to the 2/7B chord, so there's nothing kind of unusual about that. Then he does this hop from the first inversion to the root position. Just keeps the movement going of eighth notes or quavers, but also just gives us a bit more dissonance there for a temporary moment before going on there. And then instead of just going 5/1, what it does here is that we have a decorated suspension in the tenor. It's prepared here, it's sounded there, it's resolved there, and it's a 4/3 suspension, but it's decorated so it goes 4/2/3. So we've got, so you can hear how that works. And then a little classic Bach trick. You're on a dominant chord and we just add a seventh as a passing note just to complete that. So seventh, and then it resolves onto this note as part of the tonic chord. And that's how he ices the cake. So the original, uniced. Pretty boring. I might be asleep soon. And imagine by the time you've had another few phrases of that, you really would be in the land of nod. Listen to Bach icing the cake. Absolute transformation. So, whether you're just trying to improve your own general 4-part harmony skills, in which case there's a lot to take away from this, or if you're kind of trying to write some chorale harmonizations in the style of Bach and you're thinking, well, I've got chords that work, but it still doesn't sound like Bach, hopefully this video shows you what you need to do with your basic harmonization to bring it to life, to make a cake that's solid, and then to ice it. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you on a tour of the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots of things there. You may decide that you want to improve your keyboard harmony skills, get all this stuff under your fingers. One of the courses we have there is a keyboard harmony course that really does an A to Z journey, explaining the chords, showing you how to play them and the progressions under your fingers. It will get you really kind of good at finding chords, chord progressions, improvisation, kind of hearing things in your mind that you can then notate with confidence, or looking at notated harmony and beginning to hear it and feel it under your fingers. So for keyboard players especially, that would be a really useful course to go for. But there's so many other things on there. Do have a look at the courses, have a look at Maestros, have a look at all the other things that we've got on there, even merch as well. www.mmcourses.co.uk.